Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to spend the next hour and a half looking at painting sunsets in watercolor. So yeah, we'll be switching through to the flat lay view in just a moment. Before we do, I'll introduce you to some of the materials we're going to be using today. I'm using Fabriano Artistico paper. It's a cotton rag paper. I've cut mine to about 6 by 6, but your size is up to you. You could mask a bigger piece down. I'm just keeping it quite small to try and make sure I can finish the piece during this time. For my brushes, I'll be using a Da Vinci Casaneo quill. This one is a size 4, so it's a synthetic brush, but it holds a lot of water. It handles very similar to a Kolinsky sable. So yeah, you can get a lot of water and pigment in here. So this is brilliant for washes, keeps a nice point as well, so you can get a reasonable amount of detail. And then for the fiddly bits, this is a size 4 round and Da Vinci Casaneo again. Yeah, I choose these because of how much water and pigment they can hold. So if you've ever had problems, doing washes and find that your brush runs out of pigment partway through and you end up getting stripes, these are a great solution. For my paints today, can we switch to the above view, please? And I'll just take everybody through my palette. Thank you. For my paints today, I'm using translucent staining colors. So these are all from the Daniel Smith range. They're modern pigments, so they're all synthetic. Staining, as the name suggests, means that when you put them down, they tend to stay put. So it can make it a little bit trickier to kind of lift things and change things. But what it does mean is when you're layering, you get this lovely kind of translucent glow, and you can layer colors one on top the other and build up this sort of beautiful depth to color. So we'll be doing some mixing on the palette today, but we're also going to be looking at something called optical mixing, which is where we mix on the paper by using glazes to build up our depth and our interest. So my colors today, we'll start here. I'll sort of take you the wrong way around the color wheel, I guess. I'm using Quinacridone Gold, and that's a neutralized golden color. So it's a kind of a warm yellow, but with a slightly neutral ochre edge to it. I've got transparent Pyrrol orange, and it's a fairly warmish orange. There's a little bit of red in there. I've got Quinacridone red, which is it's a cool red, which means it's a little bit pinky. It's not a scarlet. So that's going to be really nice for it will mix with the transparent Pyrrol orange to kind of extend the range of our oranges, but we can get some nice purples from it as well. I've got Quinacridone violet, which is sort of a reddish violet color, and Indanthrone blue, which is a really deep purpley blue. So the Quin violet and the Indanthrone will be mixed sort of beautiful, rich, deep purples. I'm not using a green, so going back to the color wheel on my palette, I'm missing out green, and I'm using sort of mostly quite warm colors from the section of the color wheel. Okay, so I'm going to start off by doing a very quick rough sketch of my scene. I'm just using pencil. You can use pen if you prefer. Just going to keep it quite loose. And Pamela does have an image if you want to see my reference. This is one of my paintings, but you are very welcome to paint from it for learning purposes. So I'm just drawing in some rough rock formations. I'm gonna just zoom in a bit there. There you go. we'll move out in a minute so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, I've just got some sort of small rock, large rock. Going to draw in a tree, just keeping this quite loose. Pressing a little bit harder than I usually would just to make sure you can see. And my tree is going to be quite windswept, so I'm imagining my sun and my wind are going to be coming from this direction. So sort of the main swoosh of the tree is going to be coming out this way. And I'm just, yeah, keeping it very loose. I'm not overthinking these shapes too much. Then have another tree in the foreground, just very lightly sketching in where my trunk will be. And just trying to keep the shapes very loose and organic. This is definitely something that comes with practice. You know, the more you practice drawing, definitely some, you know, plein air experience going in here as well. Trees are one of my go-to things to draw. I'm that person who'll go to an urban sketching location and come away with 3 really nice drawings of trees. And then just trying to make sure I'm getting a bit of a pattern going here with my rocks, which isn't too ideal. So I think we'll just expand that one a bit. What I want to do is just kind of make sure that my shapes are varied. And then I've got a couple of trees in the background, and I'm not going to go into any detail at all with them, really. They just get a little bit of an outline. Okay, then short line for my kind of horizon point. And then just a brief outline for the mountains, and then for the clouds. Let's start at the top, and I think, you know, the main focus of the picture is in the center, which, you know, composition wise is sometimes a no-no, but with the square format, you can tend to get away with having something in the middle. And I'm going to kind of make my cloud lines lead towards that second tree, so it's not too much like, you know, massive bullet in the middle of the target in the middle of the painting. And I'm just sort of keeping this, again, very loose arch shape. And I'm just going to have a little bit of sun peeping out. So I just sketch that in very lightly. And that's all I'm going to do for outlines and detail. So just keeping it dead simple, dead straightforward. Okay, and so I am ready to start painting. So I'm going to zoom out again. I want to show you as much of my palette as I can. Okay, so when I begin a painting, I normally start off with my yellow. 2 reasons for this. It's the lightest color, so it's good for kind of setting up those lightest lights. It's also the color that's kind of most likely to get contaminated, so starting off with it while I have clean water and a clean brush is a great idea. So I'm just making a very, very weak wash of it. If I hold that up, yeah, you can see that is very, very watery. There are some very gentle speckles in the glaze of my palette, and you can still see those. This is a very, very light wash. I'm going to be mostly painting wet on dry today. If I was working bigger, I would probably work wet on wet for this section, but I want to make sure that it's going to dry relatively quickly, so I don't want too much water sloshing around. And I'm using my big brush just to keep it relatively loose. So I have my little sun kind of peeking through there, and I'm going to be painting the sort of lower couple of layers of clouds to work my way. And actually, I'm going to want a little bit of light on my tree, so I'm not worried too much about keeping in the lines because my sun is, let's turn it right around. Because my sun is around here, I know my sunlight is going to be kind of, the last few rays of sun are going to be catching the bottom of the branches. So I don't want too much yellow kind of up in the top of the trees. With my Queen Gold, if I forgot to say that. And I'm sort of pulling the gold up into the clouds. And I'm thinking ahead also where I want my colors to be. So sort of thinking about the color wheel, anywhere I put my gold, if I put blue over the top later, then I'm going to get green. So areas like up here, if I want to have a really deep dark blue, I'm going to avoid the gold. And I think I want here to be pinky. So I'm just going to kind of confine it to places I know are going to be more orange later. I'm just pulling it over here. And then as we get farther away from the sun, there's going to be a little bit less color to it. So here's my transparent Pyrrol orange, just getting just a little bit on my brush. And again, just a very light wash, a very watery consistency, like a herbal tea. And if you're new to watercolors, they tend to dry even lighter than they look when you put them down. And I'm going to let some of this get into my tree as well. I'm just going to keep a bit of white between the orange and the edge of the paper, the edge of where I've got the gold, just so I don't get any blooms. Otherwise, the orange will kind of charge through. And then here as well, again, not being too picky. Don't worry if you get outside the lines, especially because we're going to be pushing the darks later. We can tidy up a lot when we get to that stage. And then just going to keep a tiny round rim of white here. I can see my gold is still wet. And it's okay to turn your paper if you find that it's a more convenient angle. I'm going to tip it down. I've just got a little bit of a bead of color forming there, so I'm going to lift it up so it doesn't give me a back run later. Okay. So I've got my first wash on my trees, and most of the light, I'm going to leave that to dry for a minute, and we're going to have a look at those rocks. Picking up a bit of my gold again. Again, I'm just going to leave a tiny white line. If you've got a hairdryer handy, or if you're going to be doing this farther down the line, you do not have to leave that white. Especially, you know, it can be one of my sort of signature style elements, but in sunsets, they can actually sort of have a bit more impact without it. But I'll bring it in today just so we don't spend too much time actually having to watch paint dry. And again, in the service of drying things up a little bit quicker, I'm just running my brush over the edge of that gold color. Okay, then we're going back with our Pyrrol orange. And because the gold is still wet, they're just going to kind of blend together. And, you know, it's going to give us some interesting soft edges that we'll be able to play with later on when we're adding a bit more sort of interest and definition. And I'm going to be sort of building up the darks. This is, you know, these cracks in the rock are going to be where my darkest darks are going to be later. So I'll be able to use the orange to help me build those up. So we'll be using sort of lots of deep blues and purples. And I pull my color wheel palette back over. What is going to end up happening, and I'll run this through again later, but because my orange and my blue are opposite ends of the color wheel, I'll be able to use that to help me build some really deep, dark tones later. And again, I'm not being too precise. My tree is dry, so I'm safe to sort of go right up to the edges. Leave a white line if you want to, or if your tree isn't quite dry. Let the color get just a little bit deeper. See, it's brighter. I've got a more of a regular tea kind of a mix now. And then as we get farther away from the sun, I'm going to want my colors to get cooler and a bit more neutralized. So I'm going to dribble around so you can see my palette and what's going on. I'm going to take a bit of my Quin Rose, my Quin Red. You might be using Quin Rose, in which case that's what you go for. And then just going to add a tiny touch. It's my Quin Violet. If you're using dioxazine, that will work as well. You just need a little bit. You see how that's kind of just taking the edge off that bright pink. And again, this is just want to make that a little bit thicker. This is a very sort of thin wash. This is really just kind of laying my base colors down. And when I get to the trees, you can turn your paper around if you find that easier. I'm just sort of giving a little flick, you know, just adds a little bit of energy to the side of my tree. And then with the big quill, I get to paint quite quickly. And then so I'm going to pull a bit of that into my orange, which again is kind of neutralizing it a little bit. Got a bit of the yellow with the purple, and they are complementary colors. So it just kind of creating this interesting sort of peach tone. And just that little touch of neutral can be, you know, what stops the sunset feeling totally oversaturated. You'll see as I keep painting, I'll be bringing more, you know, just edges of neutral colors through. I don't want things to end up feeling kind of really gray. I don't want to end up with lots of browns and grays in the picture, but I also don't want to make it look like, you know, a rainbow was just thrown up on it or something. Making a little bit more. I'm not getting, again, too picky with the colors. This is just to get a little bit of variation in that front rock. One of the reasons I love Fabriano Artistico is it's quite fast drying. I do use Arches too, and the dry time on that is a bit longer. So if you love wet and wet, then Arches is a great go-to. When you want colors to dry quite quickly, then yeah, your Fabriano Artistico is a brilliant place to start. Okay, so this has just kind of got me some base colors down, and then I think I want to lay the base down for the water, and by that stage then I should be able to return to my sky. So for my sea, again, we're going to be thinking about neutralizing things a little bit. I've got my Indanthrone blue. Pop a little bit of that in there. I'm going to add just a touch of my Quin violet, which is going to tone down that super intense blue straight away. I'm just going to test that out and see what I think. So that would work, but it's still a little bit saturated. So spinning across my color wheel again, opposite my blue is my Pyrrol orange. I'm just going to take a tiny bit of that, really a tiny bit, and very carefully, because I don't want this to go grey. I'm rinsing my brush off now, so you could use a small brush so you don't overcompensate. And hopefully that showed, just graze it down just a tiny bit. If I put it on my paper, it's still that kind of purpley, but it's just reduced the saturation and intensity a bit. So I've just got a slightly more natural color. And to start off with, I'm just going to wash that all over my sea. Just dipping my brush in my water. I'm just going in, I'm tipping my paper a little bit. I'm just going to do a bit of a gradated wash. My brush isn't totally clean, but that's just sort of letting me lighten the color up. And I can go back into my palette and pick up more of the pure color. My rocks are dry, so I can take this right to the edge. And then I'm just, again, lifting up the bead of that color, so when I let it lie flat, I don't get a background. Just going to mix a little bit more of that. So this is my Indanthrone blue, my Quin violet, and a little bit of transparent Pyrrol orange. And this is a slightly, that's gone a bit too red, so I'll add a bit more blue. Sort of a slightly richer, thicker mix. And we'll be sort of working on the crisp lines later, but just to add a little bit of interest off the bat. Just swishing a couple of wet and wet lines through. So that's going to end up sort of lovely and soft and moody. And I can build on that a bit more later. You can already see that color is kind of lightening. Yeah, it's just given me some kind of nice, dusky, moody purples. Not too kind of bright and acidic. Okay, so we're going to head back to our sky now. So we've got our Quin gold, touches of Pyrrol orange over here, and my sun is down here. So you can see my palette okay. I'm mixing up a slightly more intense version of my Quin gold here. So this is sort of regular tea, I guess, rather than herbal tea. So I've got my sun down here. And what I'm going to do is kind of, I think I'll use my smaller brush. Let's go get a little bit fiddly. Yeah, I'm going to paint around that sun. This is kind of my second pass with that glaze. So, you know, if the sun is going to be so bright, it'll be almost white. Just going to lift that up a little bit, see if that helps. You've got quite a bit of reflection there. And I'm just kind of loosely following the mountains and the outline of the rocks. And then I'm going to take a bit of my Pyrrol orange, mix that in, and start painting with that next to it. So I've still got a very kind of yellowy orange And that's just going to gradate quite nicely. Just starts giving me a bit of a variation in color. Okay, so this cloud area is going to end up being more orangey. We'll sort of start bringing in the orangey pinks. I'm just going to give a minute for that to dry. Otherwise, what I've just done is going to bleed into it. I do tend to hop about quite a bit with my paintings. This can actually be a really good area to have two paintings going on at once as well, and kind of hop between them to give them a little bit of drying time if you prefer to kind of work on things section by section. So I think we're gonna go back to those rocks again. So we've sort of got the orange glaze here. This was kind of that pinky peach. They're all kind of very pastel and pale at the moment. So we're going to start using some of that optical mixing I was talking about earlier to bring up a bit more glazes and colors. And sorry, Pamela, have we had any questions?
No questions so far. There were a couple material questions, but I think I got them. You are using a #2 quill today, is that correct?
Yes, yes. Yeah, most of the painting so far has been my #2 quill, and I just used the #4 round for that bit. Yeah, almost all the painting I do happens with these two brushes. Okay, so I've got my sort of neutralized purple mix that I made earlier. I'm going to be playing with that a little bit more. Let's just move this so you can see. The yellow I used in the sunny area was my Quinacridone gold. So that's the yellow I'm using for everything all the way through. Okay. So I'm going to get a bit of Quin red. So we're sort of working on some more neutralized colors, and this is the Quin violet. So I want to be careful here because I don't want it to end up looking too kind of Barbie. Yeah, this is kind of leaning more towards the Quin violet. I've got sort of a purpley tone, sort of a coffee kind of consistency. I'm getting a bit more oomph to my colors now, and I'm going to paint over the orange with this. So I'm kind of starting to reach, using near complementaries with the orange and the purple. So what's going to happen is the orange that's already on the page is going to just help, especially as it dries, going to help neutralize that violet a little bit. And one thing to kind of bear in mind at this stage is it's easier to neutralize a color later on than it is to bring back a color to being something pure. So I'm going to go err on the side of making it bright. And if I feel like I need to darken it later, then I can. And I'm just painting, again, keeping it loose. Rocks are hard. It's been one of my nemesis for the longest time. It's taken me a while to crack it. And I think the best advice is to kind of bear in mind where my light's coming from. So these are a bit backlit. So things are going to be pretty dark. There's going to be just occasional edges where the sun is going to be catching. And I want these to look pretty craggy. So I'm going to be using lots of kind of straight, blunt lines, and that's going to contrast quite nicely with the trees and with the clouds as well. Sort of having, as well as bringing in contrasting colors with the yellows and purples and the blues and greens, we can use contrasting shapes to add interest to our paintings. And so kind of having, straight, stark lines and sharp spaces combined with kind of fluffy, curvy things can be more visually interesting than going, everything is curvy and bouncy. Oh, I've got a little bit of a bloom happening there. Not too much of a big deal. Just lost control of a bead there somewhere. And then I think I'm going to pick up a little bit of that neutral mix here, because that was just getting a little bit too intense. and having kind of the wet pinky mixture. And then this over the top. This is just going to neutralize it a bit. I'm just going to grab a little bit of kitchen roll and lift that up because I think I want that to stay pinky for the moment. Although they're called staining colors, you tend to be able to lift them, you know, while they're still wet, with a bit of kitchen roll or with a dry brush.
So Andrea,
Yes.
you've chosen transparent staining colors for today's projects. Would you like to talk about that a little bit with us?
Yes, so the transparent colors mean that as I'm laying one layer down, you can see previous layers through it. So pigments like sort of cerulean and cadmium are more opaque, you know, so yeah, you may well all have cerulean on your palette. That's a semi-opaque color. Cadmiums and cadmium frees are totally opaque. So that means that, you know, they will cover over what's underneath them very effectively. It also means they lift a lot more easily. So sometimes, you know, if you find you're laying watercolor washes and the layers that you've laid down before are kind of lifting and getting muddy and horrible, then that can be because you're using more opaque or semi-opaque colors and you disturb the layers below. So by choosing sort of translucent colors, it's letting the colors beneath sing through. You can start to see it in the rocks here. So I have the orange down below, and you can just get little tints of the orange through the violet mixture that I put down. It's kind of showing here as well. You know, some of these areas look almost red, you know, where the orange and the violet are interacting. So, you know, rather than do all my mixing on the palette, it's sort of letting the layers below become part of the story. What it does mean is you have to sort of think about the colors that you're applying later on. Like I said, you know, I want to be sort of careful with the gold areas. I wouldn't want to lay down gold and then put Indanthrone blue over it, because that on the paper, sorry, would then make a green tone.
Thank you for that.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to leave that to dry for a little bit, and I am going to go back to my sky. So, sorry, I have my power cable plugged into my phone. I don't want to lose you all partway through, but I occasionally knock it with my brush. So. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at kind of these higher cloud areas, and I'm going to mix a couple of colors, I think, for them. So I've got my Quin red here, and there's a touch of Quin violet as well. So this is getting kind of purpley. And I want to come back. Let's swish that around. I'm going to pull a bit of my transparent Pyrrol orange in here. And I'm going to add a touch of my Quin red. Because I don't mind things getting a little bit neutralized, I'm not getting too worried about whether my sort of palette is totally clean. And then I think we'll have some orange here as well. I'm going to be sort of letting some of these colors run together a bit. So by getting them all ready first, a bit like I did with the trees earlier, it just means things can kind of blend as I paint. Okay, so I have my sun down here. So right now it's not really popping because, you know, we have a really light area here in the rocks, and these clouds are still kind of yellow. So we're going to be sort of gradating our colors as we move up. And this bit's fiddly, so I'm going to switch to my round brush again. And then I'm going to go from my sort of pure orange. This is my orange Quin Rose mix. Because my pan wasn't totally clean, it's kind of got this sort of interesting salmon tone to it. I think I'm going to pull that through right to the edge of this cloud. And I had been thinking I'd use that violet here, but I think we'll just stick with that interesting peachy tone. Yeah, I'm just checking the edges, make sure I don't have any beads. Don't want any backflows there. And through here, I'm just looking for the gaps in between the trees. Try not to get too picky with them. I think we're going to stick with that salmon here as well, that sort of peachy, pinky, just to go behind the trees, and that'll just help us leave a little bit of depth.
And Andrea, would you mind sharing some information about the scene before you painted the reference photo for today's demo? Had you taken a photo? Had you sketched it out from real life before painting?
This one, I think I was actually, the scene came from a sketch I'd done of a day scene, and I used another reference to kind of give me the ideas for the colors. I have pushed the reference a little bit beyond reality. You know, you wouldn't normally, that we're going to end up with a lovely dark blue sky here full of stars, which, you know, you wouldn't normally see when the sun is going down. So there's a little bit more kind of fantasy than usual, I guess, going into this piece, which is why I haven't provided a reference photo this time.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm excited to get into those trees, but I think we'll sort of work on this rock area and the distant mountains as well, while we're sort of waiting for that sky to dry. So I've got my Indanthrone blue, a bit of my Quin violet, and actually, no, I think I want to push this mountain is still looking a little bit wishy-washy. I don't want it to be super bright. So I'm gonna go back into my Pyrrol orange. And I'm gonna take a little bit of that. Sorry, I'm spinning things around all over the place. Just gonna neutralize that a little bit. And then that just gives me slightly neutralized orange, and just leaving some tips here, which sort of show the original orange through. So it's going to look like the sun is really hitting them. And then I think we're going to go back to that neutral tone. Got a bit of orange in there. Pull in some violet. Way too much blue. Okay. Bring that violet back. A little bit of transparent orange, just a little bit. Okay, and then we're going to work on this rocky area there, and then, yeah, we should be good to get back to our sky. So again, thinking about my sun, it's just going to be kind of catching the edges of these rocks. And I'm just going in with choppy shapes. I do sometimes pull out a flat brush, especially on bigger pieces. If you find you kind of fall into flowy shapes all the time. And I'm not worrying too much about the edge here. I'm actually going to let that stray into the purple behind. And again, you can sort of see the transparency of the color is doing part of the work for me. Can you see that that rock in front is instantly lighter than the rock behind? And because it's a bit warmer because of that pink, it's sort of going to be pushing it forward. It's going to feel closer to us. And then I'm just sort of roughly adding some tree shapes, not necessarily following what's there already. And then I can come back down to this one. I don't want that popping. It's not very important. It's just there. So this area isn't dark. So I'm going to take that right to the edges. Just sort of pull that excess paint off the side. Yeah, and you see with the transparency, because I'd made different shapes below, basically one wash has, you know, really neutralized what's on top of it. And I've got the shapes showing through. And then we'll pull the same color into here. So this is still sort of Indanthrone blue, that Quin violet, and just a touch of Pyrrol orange. And again, I'm trying to make sure I don't fall into the pattern of making my shapes too regular. Nature doesn't tend to do that. You can switch to a smaller brush here if you want to. Again, this is just sort of darkening that area and pushing it back. And then same thing down here. Just actually, if my sun is there, just bring a bit of dark into this side of the rock as well. This is going to be very backlit, so I only really want the sun on the top. And then down here, I might let some of that stray onto my orange. This is very loose. Yeah, just trying not to overthink it. A little bit of a bead of color there, so I'm just going to use a damp brush to try and lift it up so it doesn't flow back in too much. And then I think my hillside there has dried, so again, same color. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it just to lighten it up. So once again, Indanthrone blue, Quin violet, and just a touch of that Pyrrol orange. I've just made it a little bit wetter. And we're going to go over part of that mountainside. This is just going to help. Again, if you do make a mistake, although they're staining colors, if you just get to it with a paper towel or a dry brush, they do lift up pretty well. And this area isn't going to have very much detail to it. But again, you might be able to see, it'll become more obvious as it dries. But the orange beneath is shining through. So I'm sort of getting these layers of neutrals, but it's more interesting than mixing, you know, directly everything on the palette. And yeah, more interesting than just sort of reaching for a tube of pre-made neutral as well. You know, as it dries, you'll see more texture to it. Okay, sort of, I want to get the sky down and done now, because that will sort of let me see how far I need to push the colors and how far we need to make the darks here. So let's see, on my palette, so this is Quin Red. It's that kind of pinky red. I've only tried the Daniel Smith's version. I've heard that Quin Red from other brands can be more of a warm red, more of a scarlet. So it's just something to be aware of if you use brands other than Daniel Smith. And I just want to check that color. So I've got my scrap piece of paper. I just want to hold it next to my, I'm just worried that's going to be a little bit too cool too suddenly and jarring. I'm just taking just a touch. Really is a little bit of my transparent Pyrrol orange, which should just, it's a very subtle difference. It hasn't affected the hue very much, but I think it's just going to be enough that they'll sit together quite nicely. I don't want this to be too kind of warm. I want to feel like we're sort of getting farther away from the sun. And I'm going to switch to my round. Just I'm painting right up to the edges because my colors are dry. I don't tend to leave my white spaces very much within sunsets. I just find they can be very distracting. Where I wasn't too worried about staying in the lines earlier, you can see I've sort of got some very faint little bits of orange. So if the same things happen to you, it's totally up to you. You could paint around them and leave those as little highlights in the cloud, but the sun's coming from below, so I think I'm gonna paint over mine. And you'll get a little bit of the previous layers showing through with transparency. Okay, and again, just making sure I sort of lifted up the bead. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that being that shade. You could, if you wanted to sort of push this corner back, you could drop a little bit of the kind of Indanthrone violet mix that we made in. Really excited to get to the stars, but I can't do that quite yet. Okay, so skipping around again while that dries. You know, our last step's going to be the stars and the trees. We're going to look at that water a little bit more. So sun is here. So, you know, we'll have more sun in the water kind of through here, which means that my darkest areas will be sort of round behind the trees. Not much sun is going to be getting here at all. And, you know, obviously we're going to need to block in a lot more color into the trees going forward. So I'm taking my neutral mix. I want to make this a bit thicker. If yours is really watery, you can use a bit of paper towel just to blot up what's in there. Pulling in a lot of that blue. Let's test out my color. Yeah, and this is kind of a coffee sort of a mix. Okay. And I can use the shapes I made earlier to sort of help me start getting a feel for the direction of the water. Down in here. Again, I feel like I might want to neutralize this more, but I can do that later. It's easier to neutralize a color than it is to make it pure again. I'm gonna just bring in some big long brush strokes, trying sort of vary the shapes. Make sure I don't start my reflections from the same direction. I've gone with a lot of dark here because, you know, these trees and the rocks are going to be obscuring this area. Same thing here. It's not a focal area. We'll just darken it and then out from there. You can pull our brush, flip your paper if you need to. And same thing here. You can leave little highlights along the rocks if you want to, but just remember, if you leave a light space up against the dark one, that's going to automatically kind of drag your eye. And we want, well, I want anyway, you might want the water to be your focus, but I want my trees and the sun to kind of really be the focal point. So I don't want too much contrast going on here. I might actually end up sort of darkening these bits later for that reason. Just flipping it around just to try and smooth my strokes a little bit. And then just pulling up a finer brush. My colors are going to get a little bit more neutral as they get farther away and a bit paler as well. So just adding a bit of my Pyrrol orange. Again, the orange is the opposite on the color wheel to my Indanthrone blue, and it's a near opposite, near complementary to the violet. So let's just kind of grade it down a bit. If you're using dioxazine purple, then you won't need to be adding so much orange because that's already a fairly neutralized purple. Just trying not to let this get too sort of tiger stripy. I think as we get really far away, just kind of lose the detail altogether. And I can always do another glaze over this later if I feel like I need to. Okay, so hopefully by now my sky is dry. I'm just going to tip it. Yeah, you can often see a little bit of a sheen if it's not quite dry. Just tap it in the corner. That is all good. Okay, so this is the fun bit. I'm going to lift out that color. We're going to be making quite a thick mix now. So if you're using pan colors, then you might want to sort of spritz it with water or just drip a little bit of water on it just to reactivate it. I've got tube colors here, so they're quite wet already. And okay, so we're going with lots of my Indanthrone blue. And you see them pulling in a little bit of the Quin violet. And the mix I'm making, this is getting kind of yogurty, milkshakey. If I pull my brush through it, you can actually see the brush mark staying there. The light kind of affects it, what you can see a little bit. But so this is going to be a very sort of thick, dark. I try it on here. yeah, very rich, thick, bluish mixture. So we're going to use that, and I'm going to stick with this brush. You could switch to your quill if you want to, but because I know this brush is fairly dry. Now for the stars, you could put down masking fluid beforehand. I won't be adding these stars in this session just because of drying time. You could use a white gel pen, you can use white acrylic paint, you can use white wash. Yeah, you can pop the stars in after, or if you're watching this back, you can just sort of spend a few minutes and pop down some dots of mask. They've got a lovely sort of deep, rich blue. I could have left those spots, they would have looked like stars. Looking almost black on your screen, but it is sort of a really deep purpley blue. And then that's going to let me sort of build up these tones so that they pop. Yeah, just kind of adding a little bit more life to the painting, to the scenes. This is sort of helping me establish what my darkest darks are going to be like. Okay, now we're going to have a look at the trees. I'm going to start with this one first because I want my my really deep blue to dry. So at the moment, okay, I know I want my trees to be the focal point. I know my sun is coming from here, so sort of the undersides of the branches are probably going to be lighter. I know that this tree is probably going to have more sun on it than this one. There's sort of no rocks in the way, so this one I can use lots of lovely warm colors and make it quite fiery. I also know, I want it to stand out from the colors behind it, so that's gonna affect the color choices that I am about to make. So I've got sort of peachy oranges, yeah, a little bit of the gold, so I can push those colors to make them brighter and more vibrant. And I'll also sort of think about where I put colors to kind of help make them pop. So I think we're going to start with a bit of that Quin red. And again, if I find things are getting too psychedelic, I can always sort of think about, what I can put with them to neutralize them. So if I find my Quin red feels too hot when I get it on, I can add a bit of Indanthrone blue just to kind of tone it down and do another layer over the top. We've already seen with my transparent Pyrrol orange, how a little bit of blue or purple in there just kind of just stops it being too fiery. But I think I'm going to play with fairly pure color for now. And yeah, this bit is right in front of the sun, so I'm going to make it fiery and orange, so it stands out. You see how that is instantly popping, it's getting a glow to it. And as we move up here, I'm probably going to leave more highlights, because then that will help it stand out against the kind of the peachy orange. I'm pulling a bit of my pink onto my brush. Again, I know I've got the pencil down, but just when you're sort of doing these little tendrils, these little branches, if you kind of add a bit of a flick, it just kind of sharpens it and gives it a bit more energy. And I'm going to get a little bit of variation. I'm not going to sort of clean my brush, and I am just going to tip that a bit so I don't get too many backgrounds. I'm just leaving sort of the bottom of those branches. That's pure yellow. You don't have to. If you paint over them by accident, it doesn't matter. We're all going to end up with something unique. And I'm just switching my brush between the orange and, again, I think I'll leave just down here pure yellow. It's just going to give me a little bit of an outline. with that very faint gold. Just still getting a bit of variation in there. But I meant to start with the other tree, didn't I? Gonna leave that bit for a second, just because I don't think my Indanthrone is quite dry, and I don't want this pink to go charging through it. So, oops. That little slightly more intense color is just already making it pop sort of against the sunset sky, which is why I went with such pale washes. Okay, we'll do this one now. And okay, so down here, this is going to be darker. Sun probably isn't going to get through it too much. So again, just sort of flicking my brush between the pinky and the orangey. I'm not too worried if they get a little bit contaminated. Keeping a little bit of highlight just down there, so it feels like some sun is getting to it. And then the tops of the branches, sort of going to my pinky color more, not leaving the little kind of yellow outline, yellow highlights anymore. And you can see the the warm peach, not quite dry yet, but it's already sort of starting to sing against the cooler pinky color. My trees are kind of standing out a bit more. Okay, so I'll need to give this guy a trunk in a minute as well and fill in its top, but I'm not going to touch that right now. It's still damp. If I go in and fill in, then I'll end up with massive back run on the tree. So sometimes little mistakes like that, it's better off just leaving them, going with them, and we'll figure it out with another wash or glaze later. I know I will ruin it if I try and touch it right now. It will not be pretty. Okay, so now I'm going to be thinking about if there's anywhere that needs a little bit more color, if there's anywhere that needs more kind of light and shadow, if there's anything I need to push back a little bit more. So we've got about 20 minutes, so that's good. We can finish this. This is gonna happen. Okay, so what I'm feeling is these rocks are fine, but they're kind of pushing back into the background a bit. You know, the gold here, there is nothing to make it stand out from the sun. So I'm gonna need to do something here to actually give the sun some impact. You know, right now looking at it, that is not glowing. So I think, let me see. I think I'm going to stick with the colors I have used for my trees. So exactly the same Pyrrol orange mix and Quin red that I used before. I'm just going over, entirely going over the yellow there. Bit of a bold choice, but I think it needs it. You see straight away, it's pushing the sun back. Because of the trend.
So we have someone asking if a metallic gold would work well right now on the area that you're painting.
It would give it a totally different effect, but it could do. It would really make it stand out. You might actually, want to go in with the gold around the sun. I think that would probably be my instinct, just thinking about where you want to highlight. I kind of want to, bring more attention through to the sun. But, you could definitely have a play, a few gold strokes on the tree branches could end up looking very interesting.
Thank you for your insight.
And then I'm just sort of bringing the same, again, not worrying too much about cleaning my brush, just bringing the same color through into the rocks there. So it's just adding a bit more depth, a bit more presence. I'm going to pick up a little bit of my Indanthrone there. And sort of mixing it with the Quin red. I'm just using that to sort of deepen the colors here. And then I've kind of got my more distant trees. These guys are already pretty neutralized and pushed back. I think so. I'm going to add a bit more of my Quin violet. I think I'm going to leave those alone for now. I'll pull that in down here, leaving kind of a light edge. Again, I'm just going to bear in mind as I go through, where I want my viewer's eye to be taken. So I might end up painting over that later. That might not be the best place for it, but I'm just dipping into my Quin, my sort of Indanthrone blue Quin violet mix. For those foreground rocky areas. Need a little bit more water on my brush to activate that. And then the same here. Sort of got some natural shapes that have happened just from previous brush strokes. So I can kind of paint around those and just use those to help me sort of figure out where some of those rock shapes are going to be. And then I'm thinking this is a bit too featureless for the moment. So again, just my Quin violet, Indanthrone blue. It doesn't need too much in the way of features or interest. This is very much part of the background. And I'm just making a few loose marks up here just to kind of give it some kind of presence. And my sun's coming down here. So just a couple little light touch of color on the side of the branches that would be in shadow. Okay, now I get to work on my fun trees a bit more and sort out the top of this one. So going back to my warm colors again, This was Quin Red. I think I added a little bit of Quin Violet to it, which is just going to make it a little bit more neutral. So I'm going to, this is sort of that coffee kind of mix. You know, it's not my thickest, but it's got a bit of pop and presence to it. I'm just using that kind of on the back side of the tree. It's going to stand out against that orange. So on areas like the trunk, you can kind of think about where you want the shadow to be. Thinking about my lighting direction. Again, this is just helping to angle it just a little bit. You don't get quite so much reflection. Yeah, so sort of helping it to stand out from the clouds. And it's kind of enhancing the color of the clouds as well. So I'm sort of using value here. If you kind of squint at the painting, you know, you'll notice that, you know, the rocks down here, the trees here, and now this tree here are really starting to look darker. So as my color mixes get thicker, my values are getting darker, and it's just bringing a lot more presence to the painting. You know, watercolor can have a bit of a reputation for being wishy-washy. And, you know, it's often because, you know, people just haven't sort of pushed the values in wherever the darker areas are. And then we're going to do the same thing on this forward tree. I want this to be cooler. One more thing. Sorry, just go back in there, finish off my tree trunk. Poor thing, don't want any levitating trees. Fill in a bit more of my Quin Red or Quin Rose if that's what you're using. And again, so my light's coming from here, so I'm just leaving the left side of the trunk a little bit lighter, you know, letting the oranges and the peaches that we laid down earlier show through. You can leave kind of little highlights of color if you want to, just to kind of add a little bit of texture. I kind of let it get a little bit scrappy around the edges, just for that reason. Kind of where I can get a little bit more fiddly and start, you know, cleaning up branches and edges and things. And just be aware with highlights, you know, if you leave them on the wrong side, then they can end up really grabbing the eye. I'm just trying to be a little bit careful. Okay, and you see with that pass, suddenly the painting is starting to get a lot more presence. It's starting to, well, yeah, really approach being finished now. We've got more presence, we've got more depth to it. And so this is the point where I can really start sort of fiddling around, thinking about, you know, where my highlights are, whether things are working, what else needs a little bit of light and life. So we've got, yeah, 8 minutes just to kind of add our finishing touches. So yeah, one area I'm kind of aware of is sort of my my distant mountains. I don't want a lot of detail in there. They're farther away, they're pushed away. I could just leave them like that. There's something not quite doing it for me about the color. So I think we're just going to go in with a little bit more detail and interest. So got my Indanthrone blue, a little bit of Quin violet. I want to keep this cool. So, you know, as things get farther away, they get lighter, they get less detailed, the colors tend to look more neutralized. That's going to help push them back. And of course, they get smaller. So, you know, my mountains in the background, you'll probably be reading them as mountains, even though really, you know, they look about the same size as these rocks in the foreground. And I think we'll just add a little bit of my Pyrrol orange, again, just, you know, making sure I keep that neutral. Okay, my sun is coming from here. So I've sort of got my highlights on this side of the mountain. Actually, this might be what's throwing me off. You see this tiny bit of mountain here? It's really light. And again, it's competing with the sun. So, okay, I'll keep that mix for in a minute. Changing my mind. I'm picking up some of my Pyrrol orange. My brush is a bit dirty. That's good because it's neutralized it a little bit. And just, it's a very washy wash again. I don't think it needs to be terribly strong. But yeah, it's just going to help lift my sun forward a little bit. This stage of the painting is kind of always a bit of a balancing act, you know, so it's just really keeping thinking about what my highlights are, what my focus is, what story I'm trying to tell. I could go into the sky again if I wanted to as well, and just add a little, you know, a second pass to the golden sky around here. Again, don't want to make it too bright. I don't want it to compete with the trees and the rocks, but a little bit more Quin gold in here would also help sort of bring the sun forward if I was worried about it. I think I'm pretty happy with it where it is. I'm liking my trees. I could go back through and add another more purple pass if I wanted to kind of give some deeper shadows. Looking at the reference photo, that is what I've done there. So that would have been Indanthrone blue and Quin violet, just to give some really dark shadows. We might go through and do that in a second. Part of the reason I'm being cautious though is if I add more dark shadows here, is it then means I have to add, you know, more darkness here to kind of balance that out. This is kind of my darkest area, and right now, you know, with the time that we've got, this is working as an image for me. I think the one thing I probably want to do is just my rocks aren't quite feeling finished, so I'm just gonna get another again, my Quin violet, my Indanthrone blue, way too much Pyrrol orange. You see the power of neutrals. I've kind of made an interesting red brown, which is interesting, but not what I want. And we'll bring more. It's going to need more blue. See if I can bring it back to life. Sometimes you just got to lift up the whole thing and start again. Are there any more questions, Pamela, while I just round off my rock formations?
Well, there's been some curiosity in the chat about the sun, and are you planning on leaving it just as a light wash and bright, or do you think you'll go into it to add more color?
Okay, we'll scrap the rocks, and I think what I would do, because it's not quite standing up enough, is I just get some of my Quin gold. This is pure Quin gold. I've already done 2 passes, but it's just not quite popping enough. And add another pass of that. And then this is a little bit of transparent Pyrrol orange. So what this is going to do, it's going to help sort of push back this cloud area. I'm using very wet washes. I don't want this sky area to kind of come forward of the trees. If I make the value too dark, then it's going to power it into the foreground. And then same thing here, just very light wash on my brush. And there you go. That now this is the lightest area in the picture. And that's just zapped it forward without me needing to go and add any sorry, finishing a sentence. So sort of zapped it forward without me needing to add any kind of shiny metallics or gold or anything. Yeah, I think I will go in. So this is Indanthrone blue, a bit of Quin violet. I might take that just up to the edge. This is quite a light wash. It's going to dry a lot lighter than it is looking right now. And that's just going to push back that whole mountainside, which has become a lot more neutralized. And let's go in with my large brush. This is dry, or dry-ish. I'm just lifting a little bit of that color I've just laid down out, just to give it a little bit more shape. And you can see with the translucency, the layers that I put down before are still showing. But yeah, that's just helping that sun to pop a little bit more.
Beautiful. I love when you were asked what to do with the sun, your perspective went around it and you started to work with all the elements around it. I'm going to take that with me from today's demo. Amazing, Andrea. We're so happy you could be here with us today. Like, so very inspiring. Absolute delight to watch you paint and to listen to how you solved your questions as they popped up about the painting. So big thank you. And wow, everyone in the chat today, thank you for your contributions and everything that you add to the demo, for being here. It's such a beautiful community. It's my favorite part of my job to be here with all of you for these demos. And now, Andrea, the love blast is coming in. all this nice gratitude in the chat. I'll make sure you receive all the messages in the chat.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Pamela, for hosting today, and yeah, to Opus for letting me be here and for the opportunity. And thank you to everyone who's come and watched and painted along. I hope it's been helpful and useful and inspirational. You are welcome to send me a DM on Instagram if you still have any more questions, or if you've created a painting, then we love to see what you've done. So you can tag me at Andrea England Art, and you can tag at Opus Art Supplies as well if you want to share what you've created. It's always really cool to see what's happened.
Yes, absolutely. And for the folks out there wondering if Andrea teaches, she does. She does have courses. I've popped her. I'll make sure you have her website. I don't know. Do you have anything coming up right now, Andrea?
Well, next month is World Watercolour Month, so I'm an artist ambassador for that. So I'll be sharing sort of resources and prompts. If if you are looking to kind of expand your watercolor practice and you want some ideas and inspiration, next week, I think it's the 27th of June, I'm doing a plein air session with Opus Art Supplies in Victoria. So you can register for that as part of the Opus Plein Air Challenge on the Opus website. I can't remember the URL, but if you Google Opus Art Supplies Andrea England, it will come up. And there are some other great instructors leading sessions as well over the next few weeks. And I know they have a session on July the 1st as well, which is, a big plein air challenge event. So I won't be teaching with that, but I'll be hoping to make it. So if you're interested in plein air, all of that's well worth checking out.
Absolutely. And just one small question about your painting today. How would you add the stars into like the dark area up at the top? And will you be posting it afterwards?
What I would usually do would be to use little lots of masking fluid. Now that can be a long and time consuming, well, it requires a bit of a dry time. You can't do the wash over the top until you're sure that the masking fluid is dry. What I will do with this one is I will use a Posca pen, which is these kind of acrylic paint markers. You could also use gouache or gouache, or however you say it, or a bit of white acrylic paint, and just sort of either dot on the stars or mask over. And if you flick some paint on a toothbrush, then that can give a really kind of natural effect. Or just with a gel pen, a white gel pen will let you get some skies that pop. And a great opportunity to kind of play with sparkles and metallics as well. If you want to, you can sort of push it as far as you want and have as much fun as you like. And I will do a little bit more on this guy, and I will post him in my Instagram stories. So if you want to check it out, you can find it there. And I think it gets cross-posted to my Facebook page.
Sounds good, Andrea. Thank you again so much for being here with us today. And I just really hope everyone has a creative day. So until next time.
Thank you.